The sound of fiberglass screaming under the crushing weight of a hydraulic claw is something you never forget. It's a high-pitched, agonizing shriek that sounds almost human, almost alive. And as I stood there on the edge of the dock at Azure Cove Marina, watching the excavator's metal teeth tear through the hull of the Starlight, it felt like they were ripping through my own chest. This wasn't just a boat. It wasn't just a collection of wood and fiberglass and diesel engines. It was the last tangible piece of my late wife, Elena, a 45-foot sanctuary where her perfume still lingered on the pillows and where we had planned to sail into the sunset of our golden years until cancer stole her away and left me anchored in grief. But Corinna Vance didn't care about grief. She didn't care about memories or the fact that I had occupied that slip for 15 years. She only cared about the sterile aesthetic of her neighborhood and the power trip that came with her position as the newly elected president of the Vista Del Mar Homeowners Association. She stood there by her pristine white Range Rover, clutching her designer bag, watching the destruction with a smug, satisfied smirk plastered across her face, likely texting her brunch friends that the eyesore was finally gone, unaware that the man standing 20 feet away, the man she thought was just a helpless, washed-up widower, was about to dismantle her entire life with the precision of a nuclear engineer. See, here is the detail that Corinna and her little army of clipboard-wielding tyrants failed to uncover in their rush to ruin me. I wasn't renting that slip, I didn't answer to her HOA, and I certainly wasn't a squatter, because unbeknownst to everyone in the Vista Del Mar complex, I, Elias Thorne, actually owned the entire marina, every single one of the 92 slips, the commercial fuel dock, the parking lot where her SUV was idling, and the very ground she was standing on. Let's rewind, because to understand the sheer magnitude of the mistake Corinna just made, you have to understand the history of this place and the woman who made it a home. I spent nearly 3 decades as a propulsion systems engineer for the Navy, living a life of rigid structure and gray steel, until I met Elena, who was all color and chaos and laughter that sounded like wind chimes. Back in 2009, when the market crashed and everyone was running for the hills, Elena and I took our life savings, every penny of the payout from my patents, and we bought Azure Cove Marina in Sarasota, Florida, acquiring the deed to the land and the submerged rights before the condos next door were even a blueprint. We kept it quiet, running it under a holding company because we didn't want the fanfare, we just wanted the peace, the salt air, and the community of liveaboards who became our family. When Elena passed 3 years ago, the marina became my monastery, a place where I could sit on the stern of the Starlight, drink my coffee, and pretend for just a moment that she was still in the galley making toast. Then came Corinna Vance. She moved into the penthouse of the newly built Vista Del Mar residences about 2 years ago, a woman who treated the world like it was customer service, and she demanded to speak to the manager. She immediately seized control of the HOA board and decided that the ragtag boats in the adjacent marina, my marina, were hurting her property value, so she launched a crusade that would make a medieval inquisitor blush. She didn't know I owned the place. She just assumed, like everyone else, that I was an old renter, a soft target. So she started with the fines, hundreds of dollars for unsightly deck furniture or unauthorized repairs, citations that I quietly filed away in Elena's old recipe box, organized by date and severity. I could have stopped her on day one. I could have walked into her office, slapped the deed on her desk, and told her to get off my property. But the military teaches you that you never interrupt an enemy when they are making a mistake, and Elena always taught me that arrogance is a trap people set for themselves. So I waited, I watched, and I let Corinna think she was winning. Let her believe she was tightening the noose around my neck, when in reality, she was braiding the rope for her own hanging. Her harassment campaign was systematic and brutal, targeting the most vulnerable people in our community, like Mrs. Higgins, a retired librarian who lived on a vintage sailboat and got fined for having excessive potted plants, or Captain Sterling, a disabled Coast Guard vet whose specialized medical equipment was cited as a noise violation. Corinna would strut down the docks in her heels, clicking like a ticking time bomb, handing out violations on official-looking HOA letterhead that claimed emergency management jurisdiction, a legal term she definitely Googled and definitely didn't understand. But the destruction of the Starlight was the escalation that changed everything. The moment this went from a neighborhood dispute to a scorched earth war. Corinna had apparently struck a backroom deal with a shady investment firm called Harborview Capital, promising them she could clear out the riffraff, liveaboards, and deliver a pristine, empty marina ready for conversion into a luxury yacht club, a deal that would allegedly net her a massive finder's fee. She engineered an emergency vote while I was out of town consulting on a project, declaring my boat an abandoned environmental hazard to bypass the eviction laws she thought applied to me. I arrived 20 minutes too late, screaming at the demolition crew, my heart hammering against my ribs as I watched the excavator tear into the cabin where Elena had spent her final days reading poetry, the wood splintering with a sickening crunch that echoed across the water. Corinna didn't even look at me. She just checked her watch, signaled the foreman to finish the job, and drove off, leaving me standing in a cloud of diesel fumes and heartache, holding a shattered piece of the teak railing that had drifted to the dock. My neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, came rushing out in her fuzzy robe, tears streaming down her face, apologizing profusely as if she could have stopped a bulldozer with her bare hands. And behind her was Leo, the young kid I hired to manage the daily slip rentals, looking like he was about to vomit. "Mr. Thorne," Leo stammered, shaking. "They had a court order, or something that looked like it. They said if I interfered I'd be arrested for obstruction. I didn't know what to do." He handed me the paperwork they had served him, and even through my rage, my engineer's brain started analyzing the data, noticing the discrepancies, the forged signatures, the statutes cited that didn't exist in the state of Florida. This wasn't just bullying. This was fraud. This was criminal destruction of property. And as I looked at the debris of my life floating in the oil-slicked water, I realized Corinna hadn't just destroyed a boat. She had just committed a federal felony against the one man who had the resources, the patience, and the documentation to bury her. "It's okay, Leo," I said, my voice frighteningly calm, even to my own ears. "You did exactly what you were supposed to do." I looked up at the Vista Del Mar Tower, at the balcony where I knew she was watching, probably popping a bottle of champagne, and I made a silent vow to Elena right then and there. Corinna Vance wanted a war? She wanted to cleanse the marina? Fine, I would give her a cleansing, but when I was done, the only thing being swept away would be her. The days following the demolition were a blur of cold fury and covert operations as I moved into the guest berth of Mrs. Higgins' sailboat, a cramped little space that smelled of lavender and old books, which was ironic because I was currently sleeping 10 feet away from the water I owned, hiding like a refugee in my own kingdom. Corinna thought she had broken me. She thought I was homeless and destitute, likely scrolling through apartment listings, but in reality, I was turning Mrs. Higgins' galley table into a tactical command center, stacking evidence folders high enough to block the view from the portholes. I needed allies, and I needed legal firepower, so I called in Attorney Silas, a shark of a maritime lawyer who I'd known since my Navy contracting days, a woman who could smell blood in the water from 3 miles away and who laughed out loud when I explained the situation. "She demolished the owner's boat?" Silas asked, her voice cracking with disbelief over the phone. "That's not a lawsuit, Elias. That's a retirement fund. But we need to let her dig the hole deeper. We need to catch her in the act of selling what isn't hers." While Silas started drafting the heavy artillery, I began the ground game, holding secret meetings at a greasy spoon diner 3 towns over to avoid Corinna's spies. The liveaboard community was terrified, their morale shattered, but when I sat them down, Mrs. Higgins, Captain Sterling, and a few others, and showed them the discrepancies in the billing statements Captain Sterling had managed to smuggle out, the fear turned to rage. "Look at this," Captain Sterling growled, slamming a wrinkled invoice onto the Formica table, pointing a calloused finger at a recurring charge for shoreline management services billed by a company called Vance Coastal Solutions. I looked them up, Elias. The business address is a P.O. box in a strip mall, but the registered agent is Corinna's brother-in-law. It was the smoking gun we needed. Corinna wasn't just power tripping. She was embezzling, funneling HOA dues into a shell company to pay for services that were never rendered on my property, effectively charging the residents of Vista Del Mar to harass the residents of Azure Cove. I brought in Maya Cross, an investigative journalist I'd met years ago who specialized in corruption, and when she started digging, she found that Corinna had done this before, getting her real estate license suspended in another state for similar ethics violations, a detail she had conveniently omitted when running for the HOA board. But Corinna, sensing that her victory wasn't quite complete, decided to twist the knife, issuing a new decree that non-residents were barred from the Marina premises after dark, effectively trying to ban me from visiting the property I held the title to. She hired a private security firm, another connection of her brother-in-law, to patrol the docks, men who looked more like bar bouncers than guards, intimidating Mrs. Higgins and flashing flashlights into the cabins of families trying to sleep. The tension broke the night Maya Cross published her first expose in the local paper, a scathing piece titled "The HOA Tyrant of Sarasota," which didn't name me as the owner yet, but laid out the harassment and the mysterious payments to Vance Coastal Solutions. Corinna went nuclear. I was driving back from meeting Attorney Silas when my phone exploded with notifications. Corinna had filed a police report claiming I had threatened her in the parking lot, creating a completely fabricated story about me lunging at her with a weapon, supported by the perjured statements of her two cronies on the board. A deputy served me with a temporary restraining order at the diner, looking apologetic because he knew it smelled fishy, but the law was the law, and suddenly I was legally barred from stepping foot on my own land right before the quarterly meeting where Corinna planned to finalize the sale of the Marina to Harborview Capital. It was a desperate, sloppy move, the act of a frightened animal cornered by the truth, but then she made her fatal error, the one that took this from a civil dispute to a RICO case. That night, the Marina office was broken into. Leo called me at 3 a.m., frantic, saying the door had been kicked in and the filing cabinets were ransacked, specifically the drawers containing the original slip agreements and the older ownership records. But Corinna had forgotten that I'm a systems engineer. Weeks ago, knowing she might try something, I had installed hidden, cloud-based cameras in the office vents, separate from the main security system she thought she controlled. I pulled up the footage on my laptop, sitting in the dark of my rental car, and there she was, Corinna Vance herself, not a burglar in a ski mask, but the HOA president in a tracksuit, frantically stuffing documents into a trash bag while her brother-in-law held the flashlight. She wasn't just stealing papers. She was trying to erase history, trying to destroy the evidence of my ownership so she could sell the Marina with a clean title. I watched the screen, a cold chill running down my spine, realizing she had just crossed the line into felony burglary, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy. I forwarded the video file to Detective Graves, a contact Attorney Silas had at the state attorney's office, and then I called Maya Cross. "Get the cameras ready," I told her, staring at the pixelated image of Corinna shredding my files. "The quarterly meeting is in 2 days, and we're going to turn it into the season finale she never saw coming." The trap was set, the evidence was locked in the cloud, and Corinna was walking into that meeting thinking she had wiped the board clean, unaware that she was about to step onto a landmine I had been burying for 3 months. The community hall at Vista Del Mar was packed to the rafters, the air thick with the smell of cheap coffee and expensive perfume, buzzing with a tension that felt like the drop in pressure before a hurricane. Corinna stood at the podium, looking immaculate in a cream-colored power suit, radiating the toxic confidence of a woman who believes she has scrubbed her sins away, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation that promised a new era of elegance for the waterfront. I was sitting in the back row, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, flanked by Attorney Silas and Detective Graves, while Maya Cross and her camera crew were positioned near the exit, blending in with the local news teams that Corinna had actually invited herself, thinking this would be her victory lap. And so, Corinna beamed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "With the removal of the derelict vessels and the acquisition of the Marina management rights, we are pleased to announce the sale to Harborview Capital for $2.3 million, funds that will go directly into improving our community amenities." The crowd applauded politely, the sheep being led to the slaughter, until I stood up. "Point of order," I said, my voice cutting through the applause like a foghorn. Corinna's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she recognized me, her hand instinctively reaching for the microphone to cut me off. "Security," she hissed, "remove this man. He has a restraining order." "Actually," Attorney Silas boomed, standing up beside me and waving a fresh court order we had obtained in emergency hearing for that very morning. "Judge Patterson vacated that order an hour ago based on video evidence of perjury. And Mr. Thorne has the floor." The room went dead silent. Corinna froze, her face draining of color as I walked down the center aisle, pulling a flash drive from my pocket. I didn't yell, I didn't scream. I just walked with the steady, rhythmic gait of a man who has walked on shifting decks his entire life. You can't sell what you don't own, Corinna, I said, plugging the drive into the presentation laptop before her stunned assistant could stop me. The screen flickered, replacing her architectural renderings with a high-resolution scan of a deed, dated 2009, with my name and Elena's name clearly printed at the top. I don't rent a slip at Azure Cove. I own Azure Cove. Every dock, every piling, and the parking spot your Range Rover is currently occupying. Gasps rippled through the room like a wave. Corinna started stammering. That's a forgery. He's a squatter. And this? I clicked the remote. The video of her breaking into the office played on the massive projection screen, 60 feet wide, showing her stuffing documents into a garbage bag. Is this a forgery, Corinna? Or is this you committing felony burglary at 3 a.m. on Tuesday? The chaos was instant and beautiful. The investors from Harborview Capital looked like they wanted to vanish into the carpet, snapping their briefcases shut and heading for the doors. Corinna looked around wildly, realizing her exit was blocked by Detective Graves, who was now walking onto the stage, badge gleaming under the stage lights. Corinna Vance, the detective announced, his voice booming without a mic. You are under arrest for grand larceny, fraud, burglary, and conspiracy to commit racketeering. As they cuffed her, marching her past the very people she had terrorized, she looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and confusion, unable to comprehend how her perfect plan had disintegrated. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just held up the jagged piece of teak railing from the Starlight, a silent reminder that she had started a fire she couldn't control. In the months that followed, the fallout was absolute. Corinna took a plea deal to avoid a 20-year sentence, ending up with 5 years in federal prison and restitution that wiped out her savings. The Vista Del Mar board was dissolved and replaced by a coalition of residents who actually had souls, including Mrs. Higgins. As for me, I used the settlement money and the damages from the lawsuit to establish the Elena Thorne Foundation. We didn't build a yacht club. We built a sailing school for underprivileged kids, right there on the docks, filling the air with the sound of laughter and flapping sails, the sounds Elena loved most. I bought a new boat, christened the Justice, but I spend most of my time on the dock, teaching kids how to tie knots and read the wind. It's a happy ending, I suppose, but late at night, when the water is still, I wonder about the cost. I destroyed a woman's life. Yes, she was a criminal. Yes, she was cruel. But I orchestrated her downfall with a coldness that scares me sometimes. Did I do it for justice, or did I do it for revenge? And is there really a difference when you're the one holding the match? What do you think? Was I right to let her walk into the trap, or should I have stopped it sooner? Let me know in the comments. And remember, be careful whose boat you sink. You never know who's the captain.